In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham, thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Hi, welcome to the In the Last Days television program. Great to have you with us. We welcome you wherever you're watching today, our friends in the United Kingdom, all across Europe, into Africa and into the Middle East. And we are very excited to welcome again on the In the Last Days television program, Walter Bingham, veteran journalist who has his own program, Walter's World, I believe it's called. We were talking on the last program about the horrifying thing, which at the time, and what is amazing, and what a privilege we have to have you in the studio today, Walter, is that you saw history, and many of us have seen the terrifying pictures of the book burning, of the Nazis piling up these books, and the singing and marching, and you saw that with your very own eyes, and we're talking about it on the last program.
Yes, that was it was very interesting, burning German culture, in effect. And you know, at the turn of this century, Time magazine asked its viewers in a questionnaire or in the paper, who contributed most to the 20th century? And of course, people mentioned naturally Martin Luther King in America, Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Someone even mentioned Elvis Presley, I think. But who do you think was the person who was voted by the readers of Time magazine to have contributed most to the 20th century? It was Albert Einstein. And his books went on the bonfire. Isn't that amazing? That's interesting. Well, that's so
the theory of relativity.
All that went. Well, I think they said that it wasn't that someone else did that, in typical fashion.
And did you see Neighbours, or you were quite small at the time?
I was at that point in the book burning. I was a very young teenager. You know, memory fades, and one has to be very careful in relating these stories that you don't distort or embellish them. Mm-hmm. Yes, which I'm very careful not to do, of course. Now, I want to get back to the boycotts of the shops. I mentioned them in the last program, I think. There you see the newspapers were full of articles, for instance, Jews are not allowed in the tram. We had a tram only on the front platform.
And this was in the newspaper?
That was in the newspaper. This comes out of announcements. And then you have an article that says, the town in which I lived was called Karlsruhe on the Rhine. Maybe I should show you where it is. And here's Germany, there's France, and it's just there's the border on the River Rhine, and it's right there. And so Karlsruhe bath, these were public bath and you know.
What they call swimming pools today.
Swimming pools, yes. Judenfrei, free of Jews.
Right.
So it's okay now. They're no longer contaminated. You can go in. And then there were also, of course, the boycotts of the shops, where, as you can see here, is a picture of an advertisement in the paper and saying German women and German men come to the boycott of the Jews, and then you also have a picture here of some local councillors or people in the local administration being driven through the town and displayed, and people could throw things at them, and
these
the
were
Nazis
Jewish?
were guarding them. Yes, Jewish, yes. So,
and Natalie mentioned an interesting point, that in the middle of all of this, you were still at school at this
Yes,
stage.
at that time I was still at school, sitting in the back.
But you were at the back of
I
the
was at the
classroom.
back
You
of the
hadn't yet had to leave the school. You were still
No,
there.
I hadn't had to leave. But that came, eventually the local authorities and in fact national authorities decided that Jews can no longer be in a school with Aryans. I make an embellishment when I talk to school children, and I said that what do we breathe in and what do we breathe out? You can't expect the Aryan children to have to breathe in the air that the Jew breathes out. And so we were thrown out of school.
Was there any warning of that, or did it just happen
No,
one day?
They said, no, never said that you finished. Out, don't come back, I suppose. I don't remember exactly the detail, but I know that we were thrown out of school. But you know,
was there some feeling of relief because of the atmosphere was becoming more intolerable for?
Well, I suppose as a schoolboy, when you don't have to go to school, there are some advantages. And at that stage, I suppose I didn't think that I'm losing education, but we were out of school, and that was it.
Because
finished.
you'd had the people in with the you have a photograph of.
Yeah, but I want to come. I want to. Oh yes, you're right. During school, before I got thrown out, we had at school also race education. Today they have sex education. We had race education, teaching the pupils how to recognize inferior races. So they used all kinds of tricks. For instance, the picture here, you can see here a man being measured by with engineers' calipers, and they measured the nose. How wide is the? He happened to have been a Romani. He happened to be a Romani man, but it doesn't matter. It applied to all inferior races as they described them. And they measured the nose, the width of the nose. So when I talk to school pupils in my talks, I said, look around. I bet there are not two children here who have the same nose. So that shows you the nonsense. Now, all I am telling you is primary source, of course.
So you saw them doing this yourself?
Yeah. But if I say anything that I haven't seen myself, I will tell you. And my cousin, who also was in the same town, told me that in her class they had that too. And the teacher came in, special race teacher, and he looked around the classroom and said, you. And that was a girl, blonde, with plaits, blue-eyed. He brought her to the front, and on her he showed, on the shape of the head and everything else that they could think of, how a pure Aryan actually looks, how you can see it. And this girl, believe it or not, was a Jewish girl.
My gosh.
So that shows you again the nonsense of
Did the other people
race.
not shout out? It's surprising.
Well, I don't
maybe they
know.
were afraid to
Maybe, yes,
interrupt the teacher.
Well, you had to stop him from being embarrassed, I suppose. I don't know. I wasn't in that classroom. That's what my cousin told me.
And she was Jewish?
She was Jewish, of course. The girl was Jewish, of course.
And were the race lessons, were they, for as far as you can remember from all your childhood, they had these, or did they come in?
That came successively. It didn't come at the beginning. It came somewhat later. Then there were Hitler wanted, as I explained, to build up an army to expand. Lebensraum was his big
catchphrase.
Catchphrase, yes. Thank you. His big catchphrase, living space. So he needed an army to do that. But the Versailles Treaty only allowed the Germans to have 100,000 men in an army, combined in all areas of military. He had to do something. So he started these paramilitary organizations. You've all heard of the SS, for instance. That was only one. Well, you had the National Socialist Drivers Corps, you had the National Socialist Flyers Corps, and these were all militarily trained, and rather like the picture of the Hitler Youth, which you saw in the last program, they had insignia of army insignia, like from a private, from an ordinary soldier to the high generals. And that even extended to the guys who built the motorways. Oh, you know that when he said, "I give you work and bread," as I also explained in the first program, that he started by building motorways, the autobahns, the motorways.
It was the first motorways were in Germany.
These were in Germany, yes, they were motorways. But rather different from how we do it. We built ring roads around major cities in order to relieve the traffic. That was not his plan. His plan was to build roads for quick military movement.
So he was already thinking in advance, strategic roads.
Strategic. And there was a special organization of men in England. They call them navvies, the guys who built the roads. Ordinary workmen who built the roads. Even they were organized into a military organization with, as you can see here, rank structure. And how do you see it's, I know that RAD means Reichsworkers organization, but you can see the spade, which was the insignia on the sleeve, a spade. So even they were trained to be soldiers, so that he had plenty of soldiers when the balloon went up, when he started.
So he introduced military uniforms to all sorts of work.
Into everything.
With the goal of being amassing an army, but keeping inside the Versailles Treaty at that time.
At that time. But of course, he ignored the Versailles Treaty in the end, because I haven't got the date, but the area on the Rhine and where we lived was an area demilitarized zone. There were no army allowed in there. But he decided at one stage that he's going to ignore that, just as he left the League of Nations, and marched in. So all the soldiers marched in, and they had also armored vehicles, armored cars, which weren't really armored cars. They used a car chassis, and the superstructure of the car was plywood. So they built armored cars out of plywood in order to show, at that time he didn't have any real ones. So that was another thing that he ignored, where he ignored the Versailles Treaty, and in the end ignored everything, of course. We were thrown out of school, as you know. Well, now the Jewish organizations wanted, the community wanted us to get further education, so they asked, could we not have a place where we could educate? Oh, I must tell you that when they threw out the pupils from school, they shot themselves in the foot, because they also threw out all teaching personnel, from the highest university professor to the lowest assistant school teacher, assistant, and everybody was thrown out. That meant that when we eventually were allowed to have some Jewish school, and that was an old dilapidated building, the most dilapidated building in town, they eventually gave us as a Jewish school. But even so, in that building, part was occupied by children who needed, German children who needed remedial teaching. So they didn't care about them very much, such backward children, because they wanted to have the pure race. And they were in this dilapidated building. But even so, they divided the schoolyard, that although they were Germans and Aryans and we were Jews, we were even less than they were. And we were in that school.
And this was in the same town?
That was where I was born, yes. Same town where the book burning was, where I was born.
So now you were with other children, Jewish children?
Now I'm with Jewish children in a Jewish school. But what we did have, because the Jewish authorities could choose the teaching personnel. We had the best of the best, the cream of the cream of teaching personnel who made a curriculum for us which was very, very high. And that was that, and there I was until I finished, because it was mandatory to have 8 years of schooling. During the time, they also the Nazis had big rallies. Every year they had a rally in a town called Nuremberg. Now Nuremberg the name will be familiar to your viewers from the Nuremberg trials, war crime trials. And they were held because of what I'm going to tell you now. They were held in that town because of. In Nuremberg, each year was a big rally of Nazis. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of them. And they went with flags. It was one sea of flags. And Hitler came and made an important speech, rather like that once a year in Britain the Prime Minister makes at the Mansion House a very important policy speech, and that was happening in Nuremberg. It took Hitler 15 minutes to walk from the beginning until he got to the podium. It was that big. And he made, in that particular year, this policy speech were the Nuremberg laws. They were the race laws, where they started further segregating Jews. So one of them was that Jewish doctors were no longer allowed to treat Aryan. Actually, that's a misnomer, because Aryan came from India or somewhere. But that they could no longer treat German patients. But so these doctors and German doctors were no longer allowed to treat Jews. Why should you treat Jews? Let them die. And the same with lawyers. Lawyers were no longer, Jewish lawyers could no longer represent the Germans, because the German law is different, and German lawyers were no longer allowed to defend Jewish clients, have Jews as clients. Well, Jews they're guilty anyway, so why defend them? So. And you were not, as a Jew, not allowed to have a non-Jewish woman as a home help if she was under 40. Now, over 40, she would no longer be sexually maybe desirable. And I mean, can you imagine today a woman of 40? And in those days, 40, that was okay, over 40. And Jews were not allowed to have furs. And Jews were, there were so many things, no pets, no cars, and the professionals could no longer work in non-Jewish homes. So the strangulation was almost
so the Jewish community
complete.
Was almost brought to a standstill.
Brought to a standstill, and then of course came the period when the Jewish shops couldn't exist anymore, and even large department stores. We had large Jewish department stores, and they had to be got rid of. So they were sold to non-Jews, to Germans, at a song for nothing practically, because what should they do with it? They couldn't live. And you see here advertisements in the newspaper saying take over, German shop, or another one, this house will tomorrow go into Aryan ownership.
So in the middle of all of this, we're coming now to the crunch, as it were. When did the deportations, the concentration camps, did they come earlier on, or did
well,
they?
there were one or two concentration camps which were not extermination camps, where some people were taken to, where they had to stand maybe from 4 in the morning to 10 o'clock in the cold outside. They did that kind of stuff, and if you argued, you might be shot. But that was it. But you could get out of there under certain circumstances. My uncle, who had that shop I spoke about, I think earlier or in the last program, he was taken to Dachau, near Munich, and his family bought for him a ticket to Shanghai. He never went, but with that ticket, he could get out. Well, the idea the Germans had in those days was that not official extermination of Jews, it was get rid of them.
Out of Germany?
Out of Germany. Get rid of the Jews. We want to be Judenfrei, free of Jews. And that was the theme earlier. Now, you also had there was an interesting thing. Germany took over Austria in March 1938. And so in Austria lived a lot of Jews of Polish origin, like in Germany too. I mean, my family was of Polish origin who came before the turn of that century, run away from the pogroms. And we were not Germans. I didn't know what I was. I didn't know I wasn't a German. I had no idea. You know, I was just living in Germany. I was born and brought up there, spoke the language, never been anywhere else. Well, after this takeover of Austria, the Poles became very worried. All of us, they didn't like Jews either. So all suddenly they felt that maybe all those Polish Jews who would want to come back home to Poland, and they didn't want them. So the Poles issued a denationalization law, which meant that any Pole living abroad for more than 5 years had to have a stamp in the passport to validate his citizenship. When the Jews went to the consulates, they were refused that stamp. So now all those Jews, and there were lots of them.
Because that's a very good point, Walter, because one of the questions is that many people ask, you know, with the Nuremberg and the book burning and the being thrown out of school, is why the Jews didn't leave Germany when they could. But now we're learning that the Poland wouldn't take them in.
Many countries, America, Britain, they were all guilty. They were all guilty, and I may perhaps come to that maybe this time, maybe next program. So these Jews were all stateless. Now, what can you do with a mass of people who are stateless? You can't send them anywhere. So the Nazis thought, we have to get rid of them. These are the Polish Jews. So they decided to deport them to Poland. On the 28th of October 1938, they arrested all Polish Jews. In some towns they took women and younger children, in others they didn't. Well, I happened to have been in another town in the 9th year of schooling, where my parents arranged for me to go. And I wasn't at home. But when they came and arrested my father, so my mother told me, and I must tell you that this is again primary source, because my mother survived the camps, but we'll come to that another time. She told me that they came to arrest my father. And then they said, you have a son, where is he? And she said, well, he's, I don't know, he's gone out. Had I been at home, I would have been with my father, who was deported to Poland, eventually finished up in the Warsaw Ghetto. And there's a picture here which is in the Martyrs, what's it called, museum here, Yad Vashem.
Mm-hmm. The Holocaust Museum.
Yeah, Holocaust Museum. Where I'm actually, here it is. Here it is, where you can see me actually standing by a row of people, all with their soup plates, and you can see this big, like a soup kitchen from the First World War, horse-drawn, you can see it, and a big kettle. People may remember it. And they were all standing there getting their
And your
plate
father
of soup.
was there?
My father is there, standing there. We see him, we knew it's him. And I would have been standing next to him had I been there. So he went eventually went to the Warsaw Ghetto, and he perished there. one
Where you would have gone
where
as well.
where I would also have gone. So so now, why did they deported these? This story has two prongs. They deported them, and among the deportees was a family called Grünspan from Hanover, and at the border they were held for all these people were held for 3 days in terrible conditions. Because the Poles didn't want to let them in, the Germans wanted to get rid of them. You can imagine what happened in no man's land. Now, there was a boy, a 17-year-old son of this Grünspan family who lived illegally in Paris, who got a postcard from his parents telling him the terrible conditions and what they had to go through when they were deported. And this boy was very angry. So he got himself a gun, I'm not sure from where, and he went to the German embassy in Paris and asked for the ambassador. Well, you can't get the ambassador so easily, so the third secretary came out, a man called Ernst vom Rath. When he was facing him, this boy, Herschel Grünspan, took his gun and shot him. Well, this Nazi diplomat died 2 days later of his wounds. And that was the trigger for the biggest pogrom prior to the Holocaust itself, and when they burned all the synagogues in Germany, Austria, and by then already occupied Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, and when they arrested 30,000 men and took them to concentration camps, and that happened in the night from the 9th to the 10th of November, which is known today as Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, Crystal Night. That happened, and so this time sequence is 28th of October 38, 9th of November, just a few days later. Now this Kristallnacht, supposed to have been a spontaneous outburst of the German people. In fact, it was a well-prepared pogrom which only needed a trigger to set it in motion.
And if you want to hear more about Kristallnacht, you're going to have to tune in again. It's been great to be with you, and remember, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. If you would like to financially support the program or find out about conferences, meetings or ministry products, then please contact us with the details on your screen. Visit our easy-to-use website at www.inthelastdays.com and register for our free e-newsletter. Get the latest news from Israel, product information, online video teaching, or watch today's TV program at a time that's convenient to you. Thank you again, friends and partners, for making this program possible.